This is football. I'm Kevin Clark. Going to play good franchise, bad franchise a little bit later. JP Finlay covers the Commanders, joins me. Zach Berman will join midway through and we'll chop it up. He covers the Eagles. We'll let you guess which one's the good franchise, which one's the bad franchise. A little compare and contrast, and also just dive into the specifics of those two teams that seem to be going in opposite directions. Ron Rivera press conferences not hitting a high note this week, I would say, and new ownership with the Commanders. I'm intrigued to see where it goes. Quickly want to talk about the starting quarterbacks for this Sunday. It is a quarterback apocalypse. This was probably confirmed. And listen, everybody was like, well, Aiden O'Connell replacing Jimmy Garoppolo. This is rough. Well, Jimmy Garoppolo is also rough. So, let's not act like there's some floor on Jimmy Garoppolo. It's going to be some good quarterback play. He's awful. Awful. And I was looking at some of his metrics yesterday, and he's inaccurate. His success rate is 25th, 26th in the league. You can't get the ball out of his hands. This is rough stuff. So it's not like there's some huge downgrade, but from the big picture standpoint, I'm looking at the list right now. Let's go through it. So Brett Rippon might start for the Rams. Gardner Minshew, obviously, in Indianapolis, just starting every single week. Taylor Heineke is actually an upgrade on Desmond Ridder. But then you have Tyson Bagent, Clayton Tune, Jaron Hall, PJ Walker. Again, PJ Walker, not a huge downgrade from the starter there. Trubisky could go in Pittsburgh. We'll see what happens there. And then obviously, there's a bunch of quarterbacks who just aren't very good. Sam Howell's just okay, generously. I mean, Mac Jones could be playing like a backup. You could make that case that he's playing like a backup. There's just not a lot of quarterback play. And the good quarterback play, Mahomes and Tua, they're in Germany this week. So stateside, not a lot of good passers. And I want to address something. So part of this is just bad luck. Whether that's Minnesota, Kirk Cousins should be playing. Some of that's bad luck with injuries, not just going to happen. It is why you put these guys in bubble wrap and make sure they don't get hurt. And everybody says, oh, body weight. No, we can't have these rough pass abilities. Well, all of a sudden you're watching a rookie from BYU play for the Vikings and you're saying, damn, I miss Kirk Cousins. And you're like, the body weight thing's not too bad. But the more pressing thing for me is that the league just, I feel, doesn't develop young backup quarterbacks as well as they should, or have competent backup quarterbacks. Part of this is the way quarterback spending has changed, where you give a guy $45 million and then the guy behind him makes 1.6 and is Josh Dobbs or Clayton Tune. And I think that the 2011 CBA, which we've all kind of discussed ad nauseum here, cut practice time and gave very little reps to the third, fourth quarterbacks, the kind of developmental quarterbacks. And we always remember the Packers in the mid-90s where some of us are young, but some of you guys are young. I'm not. I'm an old person. But I remember the Packers in the 90s where it's okay, they're developing guys every single year, and these guys are getting reps, whether that's Kurt Warner, Matt Hasselbeck, Mark Brunell. These guys behind Brett Favre were getting reps in the Holmgren system, the Bill Walsh system, and then they were pressing forward from there. And that ain't happening anymore. That's not happening at all because you don't have the practice time. But then beyond that, I think that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where they just don't put any emphasis into it. There's the old anecdote, the Tom Moore anecdote, that Ron Jaworski told in his book, where they were saying that they asked why Peyton Manning backups don't get any reps. And Tom Moore said, because if Peyton Manning goes down, we're effed. You can fill in the blank there. And we don't practice effed. We don't practice being effed. We don't practice effed. And I think that as that develops, and I'll give you a great example. A couple years ago, Derek Carr goes down around Christmas time in the year that he almost felt like an MVP candidate, right? 2016. And they go through all those quarterbacks and they lose the playoff game in Oakland, obviously. And somebody asked Jack Del Rio a couple weeks later, what did you learn about football this year? What did you learn about your team this year? And he said, I learned not to lose my quarterback. And I just felt like that was such a self-defeating philosophy that you can't do anything. And you think about the Eagles, who are always drafting a quarterback, developing a quarterback. Think about the Titans, who drafted 2 quarterbacks over 2 years. That's what you need to be doing: investing in the position, giving guys opportunities, knowing where you are in your life cycle. I feel like we've gotten to a situation where teams are hopeless. Most teams, 25 teams, are hopeless beyond the starter. And you wish they could put more emphasis on developing the backup quarterback so that it's not a complete nightmare when they have to go somewhere else. So you get weeks like this, it's just going to happen. But normally it's like week 16. Normally it's week 17. The fact that it's happening mid-season should at least lead to some self-scouting in NFL facilities. Like, why are we starting the worst quarterback on the planet? Why is this player on our roster? Why is Tommy DeVito on the roster in New York? Like, I watch a lot of ACC football. I know we finished up at Illinois, but like, I wasn't looking at Tommy DeVito and saying, this guy belongs on an NFL roster. Like, if you don't trust a guy to throw, there's other options out there. Maybe do you not? I understand that he's the third stringer, but like, there's a lot of good developmental quarterbacks who at least do something on a football field. I don't think DeVito is one of them. So, quarterback apocalypse. I don't know how to fix the problem. I'm not a quarterbacks coach, but it needs to get better. Otherwise, we're just going to keep having these sort of weeks. All right, here's JP and eventually Zach Berman.
Tickets to the game, merch, meals at iconic restaurants, stays at Caesar's Palace. All this can be yours when you bet with Caesar Sportsbook. Win or lose, every bet earns reward credits, which you can redeem across the empire. Now, if you haven't started yet, use the code OMAHAFULL and then place your first bet up to $1,250. If you win, great, you keep those winnings. But if you lose, you get your stake back as a bonus bet.
Commanders insider JP Finlay joins. What's going on, brother?
How are you, man? Thank you for having me.
I can't imagine a more chaotic place to be an insider of over the past 5 years, and by 5 years I mean 20 years, than Commanders Park. I was there during training camp. There was a new mood. But I'll ask you, since you know more than anybody, what's changed this year?
You know, I think the trade deadline was really the first kind of day we saw the new group put their hands around this thing. Outside of, you know, kind of they've repainted and put some new furniture in. They've spent a little bit of money, but so far it's all kind of lipstick on a pig stuff. This is actual organizational stuff, you know, and they'll say whatever they want. There's no way that this iteration of the Commanders front office and coaching staff wanted to trade away Montez Sweat. The second round pick is good value, especially with where the Bears are going to be picking, but that is ownership saying, hey, we're looking long term here, not chasing a wild card spot. And that's a huge change for this franchise. I mean, under the Snyder era, it was short-sighted, haphazard, you know, zigzagging all over the place, whereas these Harris guys, I mean, Josh Harris and the group put together, they're all about building title teams, even if they have to take a long view to get there.
Right.
And that is a dramatic change from a football standpoint in DC.
So that's what I was going to ask. Is there going to be a process? Like and by process, it's capital T, capital P, like Josh Harris did with the Sixers. I'm not really sure what the Devils did. I know the Devils are good now, and they just drafted a bunch of good players, so I don't know if that was a process or not. But is that I think there was a lot as soon as the transaction came down, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not that could even work, whether he would try that approach, what kind of GM coach he would hire, whether or not it would be analytics. Sorry to Ron Rivera, we are openly speculating about your future. Is there a read on what approach they're going to take?
Yeah, I think the NFL and the NBA are just so different that you can't really go all in on a trust the process kind of thing, because the NBA is so star driven, and outside of quarterbacks 100%. In the NFL, it's just different. But I think, you're kind of seeing it. You trade away Chase Young and Montez Sweat for a second and a third, which I think is frankly pretty good value.
I agree.
They're starting a different vision, and the vision of Ron just trying to build up this defense. I mean, this defense had 6 first-rounders on it. You had the 4 up front, Jamin Davis, the linebacker, and Emmanuel Forbes, the kid they just drafted. 6 first rounders, and they're 30 as of today, 8 weeks into the season, they're 31st in points allowed. Like
Yep.
the vision right now wasn't working. And it's interesting because now Ron's trying to sell it as, well, we've got our quarterback of the future, so we got to build around him. I kind of think that's oh yeah, that was yeah. The first press conference after the trade deadline, he clearly had his talking points on this thing. And I kind of think he's trying to angle to keep his job and such, and I understand it.
Same, always trying to angle to keep my job.
Me and you both. But it was he was what I would say is a premature declaration, but he's like, I'm pretty sure we've got our guy, and we're going to build around him, and that's why we've changed and traded these Sweat and Young away. It was a reach, but he's got to say something to maybe try to keep his team invested, and for him to sell, he needs a sales pitch to the new owners.
A couple of things about that. I like Ron a lot, and I've had some great interactions with him. He's going to need to do a little better than that as far as talking points. He's got to do a little better than that. Like, I honestly think the pivot there is like, we're rebuilding, and who better to guide these young pups than me? Even though that's not necessarily true. Like, just come up with something other than we've got our quarterback of the future. And also, by the way, if you have the quarterback of the future, there are a lot of people better equipped to guide him than Ron Rivera, who's a defensive coach with recently a middling track record on basically everything. So you went viral a couple weeks ago with the Jonathan Allen clip, which I thought was great as someone who, not necessarily on camera, but like, talking to the phone, when someone's giving you like the quote of the week nationally or quote of the month nationally, as Jonathan Allen was giving you when he basically said, I'm tired of this. We bleep out curse words in this show, so I cannot paraphrase it, but he basically said, I'm tired of losing. You kept a straight face the entire time. Yeah, you kept a straight face the entire time. You did like the very TV like nod, like he was saying everything normal. I had a huge respect for how you approached that. But my question is, things have gotten, let's say, more desperate since then because of the trades, because of the situation they're in. We saw, even though the Commanders could have played worse against the Eagles, we at least saw what the gap is on Sunday. And I'm curious, like that locker room, I know this is such a stupid talk radio question, but I'm curious to get your perspective. What's the mood post-trade deadline when people were already pretty bleak?
Yeah, it's a really fair question. So the first day we today is Thursday morning. We were in there Wednesday afternoon. And a couple of things you notice right away. Chase Young and Montez Sweat are huge humans. I mean, they're both they're like and listen, I work in the NFL, like all these guys are big. Yeah. Those guys are really big and they stand out and they're big personalities, loud. Chase is always playing music. They're always yelling at like fun banter, but yelling and joking and like making fun of each other's college football teams and stuff. And that was just missing. And it was much quieter. It was, you don't want to call something somber, but it was, everybody in that room realized kind of what was happening. No matter how much you try to sell the future or whatever's coming next, everybody in that room realized that because of the trade deadline on Tuesday, this team got worse for Sunday in New England. And it's funny you mentioned the John thing. He wasn't in the locker room on Wednesday. Normally he talks every Wednesday. And if I had to guess, I kind of think he didn't want to potentially go nuts again and say something that he wouldn't want to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, JP. And I don't think spoiler alert, he's not going to be in the locker room anytime soon.
He is a captain. I feel like the reporter in me feels that he owes us a comment on this before Sunday afternoon's game, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get it. So today, Thursday, is usually a much lighter media scene in there. So I kind of think he'll talk today, but we'll see. He also missed practice yesterday, which I think was just a day off, but that makes it a lot easier to not talk.
Yeah, I'd say. Last thing before we bring in Zach Berman for a 3-man weave, the plan at quarterback for Commanders, like, it can't really be Sam Howell, dude. It can't. Like, I know what you said about Ron Rivera saying with the quarterback of the future, but, like, I am a football dumbass. I do not understand a lot of what I see. If I went to an Eagles practice right now and I'm standing next to Zach Berman, there's a lot I would miss. When I was at Commanders training camp, I saw Sam Howell, and I've told the story a million times, but, like, and I would also put fairly or unfairly, I put Kenny Pickett in this as well, where like straight dropbacks, he's holding on to the ball forever, and maybe there's some up tempo stuff you can do, but I'm just like, this doesn't work on a Sunday in October. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work at camp. It doesn't work now. Like my football evaluation skills are so the bar is so low, but Sam Howell doesn't clear it. Tell me what the plan actually is going to be. Are they going to try to draft a guy? Are they going to try to take a big swing at a trade? Like the quarterback plan for next year with Josh Harris is what?
If you listen to Ron, he thinks they've got the guy. Now, I'm not even sure he believes that.
Yeah, well, also, I don't know how long Ron's going to be around to make the decision there, JP.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think the new guys will give Sam the remainder of this year as kind of this extended look, tryout, evaluation, whatever you want to call it. But I will not be surprised, a kid that's been sacked 41 times in 8 games, if they're looking again. And now all of a sudden after the trades, you've got 5 picks, probably. You've got 3 picks in the top 35. You're going to have 5 in the top 100, certainly, but probably 4 in the top 65. I won't be stunned if we get to January, February, and there's QB talk again. There's always QB talk in Washington, man. It's just what we do here.
Too bad they burned all the bridges with Kirk Cousins, by the way, who might be available on a cheaper-ish deal with that injury.
The last guys burned those bridges. There's new guys, so maybe you can build new bridges.
Maybe still get that minivan parked somewhere. We're bringing in Zach Berman from PHLA. Is that it? Did I get the letters right, Zach Berman?
PHLY. I appreciate that.
Damn it. I'm sorry about that. It's a great new website. They went out and they hired Zach. They went out and they hired Bo Wolf. They're serious about this thing. What's going on, brother?
Doing great. Congratulations on your show. Good to be on here.
Thanks, man. So we're going to play good franchise, bad franchise for a couple minutes when you guys are both here. So we were talking earlier, Zach, about the new ownership in Washington and what they're going to do and whether or not they're going to take a longer approach. If you're Jeffrey Lurie, let's pretend that you're Jeffrey Lurie and you're giving Josh Harris advice on how to run one of the best franchises in the NFC and one of the most consistent. Like they make good coaching hires every time. They make good GM. They make good front office hires. It seems like every time they get a number 2, he's immediately a GM candidate and a smart guy. There's a stability there. And I'm curious, being around it every single day, Zach Berman, the key to that good franchise, Mr. Lurie, is what?
I've actually discussed this with them quite a bit. The league's set up for everyone to go 8-8, right? So if you're making the same decisions that everyone else is doing, you're probably just going to be an 8-8 team, plus or minus, 2 wins. So you really need to go against the grain in some of your decisions. But in terms of the way it's built, the offensive and defensive lines, like every single year, there's always this talk: are the Eagles going to draft this running back? Are the Eagles going to draft this linebacker? And then they draft a pass rusher, or they draft a pass protector, right? So that and make smart trades. Don't be so focused on like the next 6 months. Be thinking about the next 6 years, and that's I think that's what Howie's done particularly well.
JP, I'm curious. So when you're viewing this as a team building thing, the defensive and offensive lines, obviously, they trade Montez Sweat and Chase Young. So all of a sudden they're getting rid of some of the talent on the defensive lines. But it feels like they may be considering the contract status and all that stuff, made those trades in a smart way to get a 2nd and 3rd round pick. So I'm curious, if you're just looking at it from a roster perspective, do they win this week or do they lose?
If you're a Commanders fan, and Zach, what's up, dude? I think the excitement surrounding those trades, especially in the framework of Howie thinking about 6 years, not necessarily 6 months, I think most Commanders fans are excited because it shows a new mindset. And everybody is supposed to go 8-8. I mean, under Snyder, everything was so status quo driven, and they were often arrogant when they thought they were being confident and just didn't have the roster. And I mean, dude, you talk about O-lines and D-lines. Yeah, they invested on the D-line. When Ron got here, they had Trent Williams and Brandon Sheriff, all pros on the offensive line. And they systematically got rid of everybody. Morgan Moses, Eric Flowers, and their offensive line has suffered throughout. And now you've got this young quarterback who's getting killed. And a lot of it's on him, but not all of it. And you wonder if they had a better line, how that would look. They did win this week, but it's a big picture view.
Is Josh Harris still viewed as a Philly guy in Washington?
JP? Nah, because he's from here.
Okay, all right.
He grew up here, and when he talks about going to RFK, I think. Well, let's
flip it. Zach, is Josh Harris now like people at Sixers games being like, Josh, bro, come on, you can't go against the Eagles. Is there a weird vibe there?
Frankly, I'm not convinced Josh Harris is viewed as a Philly guy in Philly, right? But no, I think that what he's done with this, it is kind of this odd thing that he owns this NFC East rival. He also owns the rival in the NHL as well, right? The Devils and the Flyers. But with the Sixers, I think as long as he's investing money and keeping Joel Embiid happy, the fans will be happy enough.
Love that. JP, we're going to let you go. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you.
All right. See you down the road. All right. Zach, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this team because I hesitated to crown them for a long time because they looked inconsistent for the first few weeks of the season. We got a listener question maybe 3 weeks ago that made me laugh so much. That was, are the Eagles going to be the worst 18-0 team of all time? And I think that kind of speaks to the psyche of the fan base, where you see what looked like. I mean, obviously they played a worse schedule last year, but it looked so fluid. It looked so efficient, and it looked so perfect, frankly. With Sirianni, with Jalen Hurts, he wasn't missing throws. Everything seemed to be a well-oiled machine. The difference between last year's team and this year's team so far has been what, Zach?
Jalen Hurts hasn't been running the ball as effectively as he did a year ago. And I think that was a big part of it earlier this season, and especially now when he's dealing with the knee injury. So that takes away some of what they're doing offensively. But they're still, they could have scored 50 on Washington last week. A.J. Brown's catching everything that's coming his way. So it's looking differently. But to answer the question succinctly, I think opposing defensive coordinators and opposing teams spent the offseason watching the Eagles and really trying to take away kind of the explosive plays and the run-pass option game.
So a couple things about that. Is there a concerted effort with Hurts? Because this has happened with Josh Allen, some of these other guys, where it's like, all right, dude, it's September 12th. Save your body. Don't take unnecessary hits. And I remember Brandon Beane has said that a lot, where he will yell at Josh for taking a hit he doesn't need to take, in October in Miami. And I'm curious, is there a game plan for Hurts's running, or is it just that he's not as sharp as he was last year, or he's more hesitant to do it for whatever reason?
Yeah, so earlier in the season, it seemed like he was a little more hesitant and he was getting down quicker. And then it became a big story in Philly, and he had a game against the Rams where he was just like, all right, you're all talking about this. Let me show you what I can do. And he has his best rushing game of the season. So I think they know that's there. But certainly these past 3 weeks, it's been more muted because he is dealing with a knee injury.
Right. I want to ask about the tush push really quickly, because you've said a bunch of times, you've paraphrased Nick Sirianni basically saying that this play works for the 2022-2023 Eagles. It might not work for the 2025 Eagles, and it's not going to work for the 2023 Jets. Tell me something I don't understand about the tush push and why it works. And we had Mitchell Schwartz on a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about Jason Kelsey and how he's probably the most valuable Jenga piece to an offensive line, because if you don't have that kind of push, and also he basically equated it to old school field goal blocking, which I found to be a pretty interesting insight. But like being there every day, seeing it, like the tush push speaks to what, and what's kind of the key ingredient of it?
The offensive line, like you said, like the strength of the offensive line and the precision with which they do this play. The like physical strength of this quarterback. I mean, Jalen Hurts, you've all seen him power lift on those national games or squat. Like he's a stronger quarterback than most. And then like before this became a big national story, they repped it to the point that like they do it better than the other teams.
100%. And we've seen it over and over again. Like, it's not just that. First of all, this whole thing feels like a viral advertisement for how much Jalen Hurts squats. I cannot believe, like, he must feel so amazing about everybody being like, wow, Jalen Hurts squats a lot. Like, we have the play now that gets him, every single time someone tweets how much he squats. But that's it. Like, certain teams do things well. Just because they're good in short yardage. Also, by the way, if you ban this play, guess what? My guess is the Eagles are still going to be pretty good at short yardage because they have a Hall of Fame center, a Hall of Fame tackle, a quarterback who can run the ball, toughness everywhere. That's how they built their lines. And I think I've told you the story, but a couple of years ago, I was doing a piece and I was at the facility, and I was talking to, it was right after the full Super Bowl, and I was talking to some of the folks there, and we were all just sitting around. And I was like, oh, you guys went for it on fourth down. You guys, making all these trades. 1-year deals were a big thing, obviously, on that team, and trying to figure out who should stay, kind of low risk deals. And somebody stopped me and they were like, would you shut up? Just in a loving way. They were just like, we won because of our offensive and defensive lines. And everything else is certainly helped and was a bonus and was a tiebreaker with some of these other teams, but like we won because of our offensive and defensive lines, and everything flows through there. And so like this is the tush push is just the product of that philosophy, is that if they need 1 yard or 2 yards, they can get it. All right, but let's talk about Jalen Hurts, the quarterback, because you mentioned the running game and the efficiency. Is he missing throws this year that he didn't miss last year at all?
I actually don't think so. I think he's been better as a passer, and part of that is just because A.J. Brown's playing at a level that unlike anything that's happened in Philly since T.O. was here. But Jalen, earlier in the season, I just think the explosive plays weren't there as much. Some of the defensive structures that they played, and then they did see some unscouted looks, especially against New England and Minnesota. That was just a little different than what Jalen was exposed to a year ago. But I think if you look at these past few weeks in particular, and again, AJ has a lot to do with it, but I don't think he's missing throws, and he's actually on pace to have his best passing season of his career.
I don't know AJ Brown. I don't think I've ever really been around him. But the numbers he's putting up are special, and in a different year. Yeah. Can make a case for MVP, frankly. If we were more creative about the MVP award instead of giving it to the best quarterback and the best team, but we don't do that anymore. So we can't talk about a Tyreek Hill or an AJ Brown for MVP. But the key to his success, like the catch radius is unbelievable. The physicality is unbelievable. The speed down the field is unbelievable. What don't I know about AJ Brown in his game?
Well, you outlined it well, but I think the yards after the catch are that's what jumps out to me. Like when the ball is in his hand, he's a power running back. I mean, he's literally built differently than other wide receivers. And like Devontae Smith is special in his own way. But if you see Devontae and A.J. Brown standing next to each other, the stark contrast is there. So I think A.J. Brown's like physical size, the presence that he brings when he has the ball in his hands is just fundamentally different than what you see from most receivers.
Nick Sirianni, I feel like gets a ton of credit in Philadelphia and no credit nationally. And I think that's a Howie thing. I mean, it goes back to, you can't give tons of credit to the GM and tons of credit to the coach. That's just not how this works. And sometimes they unfairly, this was always my thing. I won't get into other franchises where this happens, because that could be its whole episode. But where do you rank Nick Sirianni? I know this is a tough question, but where do you rank him among kind of the elite coaches? Do you say, okay, Howie gave him this incredible roster? Like before the season, I did not rank him as a top 10, or I ranked him 10th, I think, in the ranking. I said, you know what, this is fair. He's 10. He was handed this great roster. Everybody, it's almost like what they joke about it, like LSU, where the reason you go to LSU is that everybody wins national championship. I'm like, Ed Ogeron won national championship there because of just the talent pipeline. Les Miles, who can't even think, won a national championship there and competed every single year because of the talent pipeline there. Nick Sirianni, to you, is what kind of coach in the grand scheme of things?
So I actually think it's less to do with Howie and more to do with the fact that I think we in the media and kind of the football industrial complex overall tends to glorify the play calling coach. And that's not to take away from your Sean McVay, your Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel, but what Nick Sirianni does especially well is be the head coach of the team, right? He is what he does exceedingly well is knowing the temperature of his team, knowing how to keep his team motivated, knowing how to pull off when it needs to, structuring practice a certain way, dealing with players a certain way, coaching the coaches, preparing for situations, like understanding situational football, understanding how to get ready for a Thursday night game, how to get ready for a Monday night game, how to get ready after a bye, how to get ready for a playoff game. Like it's not necessarily the play call on 3rd and 4. It's more what to do overall and having your team ready. So I think that I look at some of the long tenured coaches other than Andy Reid, John Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, some of these, Bill Belichick, like guys who aren't necessarily the offensive play callers, and they've had all the success. That's how I would characterize Nick Sirianni. He's a terrific head coach of the football team.
I mean, some of these guys remind me of like Greg Popovich, where it's just like the entire thing, you're almost a vibes curator. You're like a DJ. You're a DJ in chief. You're just like, all right, I'm going to set the mood. Obviously, you do a million things. And like, this is something I talked about with Seth Walder on Sunday. The things we overrate the play calls now, and we overrate the decision making on Sunday, because 90% of coaching is how you run practice. Like I remember someone a couple of years ago, and not to bring this into the University of Miami talk, but somebody was talking about Manny Diaz, who was the coach of Miami, and somebody gave me a theory that like he is a really good DC when the coach knows how to run practice, and then he can just be the ideas guy and all that stuff. Then he became a head coach. There's so many things you just don't know about running practice, and then the whole thing, then he becomes soft because his teams couldn't tackle all that stuff. And it's like the things we don't see, you see it because you're allowed to at least go to practice and for part of it and training camp and all that stuff. But like we overrate Sundays at the cost of Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays. And so that's what I think everybody misses when we say like, oh, this guy did this, or this guy's an idiot, or whatever. Even I'm tough on Brandon Staley, but the reason I'm tough on Brandon Staley is not because he went for it on 4th down and didn't get it. It's because he doesn't have his guys ready to play when they have a ton of talent, and that's a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday problem. And so I think what you're saying, I think we agree here, is that like Sirianni is a big picture coach.
Yeah, and to that point, I'll give you like an anecdotal example here. You think about the game the Eagles just played against Washington, and you think about the NFC Championship game last year. Both those games, Devontae Smith makes a really important catch in the game. That's not a catch, right? And the Eagles rush to the line of scrimmage and get the snap off, right, before the other team can challenge it. And Nick Sirianni will tell you that's something that they rep during practice every single week. And that's not necessarily like it's obviously on Devontae to get the ball to the official quickly. But he says that's Jason Kelsey and that's Jalen Hurts. And that's like the entire offense. And there's very few times over the course of the game where they're making situational mistakes. They have these situational meetings where Nick Sirianni will he'll call on a player like the Socratic method in law school. I say that I've never been to law school, but from what I understand, where he'll say like 3rd and 4, 2 minutes left, a minute 48 left in the game. You're on the 34-yard line. What are you doing here, right? There and so the team is very well trained for situational football.
Yeah, and then that was the thing. That's Belichick's thing too. Is just like instead of saying we're going to run this mesh concept, we're going to run this mesh concept from the 9-yard line. There's 4 minutes in the game, and I remember Rodney Harrison basically saying that he thinks Belichick kind of invented that 20 years ago, but like not every team does it still. Not every team does it, and I think that's the most important thing. Is it's like, all right, you're not only practicing the catch, you're practicing getting the ball back to the line of scrimmage, or you're practicing staying in bounds or getting out of bounds if you need to. Like, there's just so many different things you would need to practice. All right, I want to do, since you've been around the Eagles for a long time, I want to do badasses with you. And so if you're not familiar with the concept, it's the most badass person you've ever seen on a practice field, on a Eagles field at the link, could be a damn coach. Does not matter. It's the person that you were around the most where you're just like, holy crap, this guy, whether it was toughness, whether it was just putting the team on his back, it doesn't matter. Give me your Philadelphia Eagles badass that you've been around in your career, Zach Berman.
So Clifton Geathers, back in 2013, Clifton Geathers, like before I ever saw Jordan Mailata or Jordan Davis, like Clifton Geathers was 6'8", 300 plus pounds. I remember talking to Michael Vick, and Michael Vick saying Clifton over there, that's my bodyguard, right? So I'm pulling that one out because like Clifton Geathers was he fits what you're saying. You don't met like you don't. I hear this expression from Nick Sirianni, the guy you want getting off the bus first. Clifton Geathers was the guy you want getting off the bus first. And then now, I mean, Jordan Mailata is like he's unlike anything you see. But then I would say when you watch Jalen Carter play football. Right, Jalen Carter's a big guy. I mean, he's not as big as Jordan Davis and Jordan Mailata. But when you watch Jalen Carter play football, he would fit that description. I mean, he's like out there, like taking people's souls. So he is. You watch him in one-on-one drills against the Cleveland Browns during the joint practices. You could see he was special.
I was talking to a coach at the beginning of the season about the Georgia guys in the college tape, and he was a head coach. And he said that he was talking about Jordan Davis and wasn't that effusive in the praise of his consistency with the motor. But then he was talking about Jalen Carter, and he's like, Jalen Carter has a little bit of that, but his best rep is like the best thing in football. Yeah. And I thought that was a really interesting way to phrase that. He was like, Jalen Carter at his best is basically the best thing you can get in football because the play is over. And I thought that was a really interesting way. And I think we're starting to see that now. I mean, Chris Long, I was on his show a couple weeks ago before the season, and he said he had a source, and Chris Long's got a lot of sources in that locker room, and said he was the best player on that defense in training camp. And like, that's remarkable to be that early on that defense, by the way. This isn't the damn, I'm trying to think of a bad defense, but there's a lot of them. But like this, this isn't the damn Raiders. I guess they have Max Crosby. Yeah. But that, it's remarkable how good he is this early.
Yeah. And, it brings to mind something actually. Jason Kelsey once said this about, he said he's played with two players in his career who are like Hall of Fame talents, regardless of scheme. You can put them on any scheme and they'd be that player. And that was Jason Peters, and that's Fletcher Cox. And by the way, Jason Peters would be probably the best answer for the previous question. I mean, Jason Peters owns every room he goes into. He's like the badass in like you don't mess with Jason Peters. You don't change the music when he's playing it. Right. Like that's Jason Peters. So, but I would frame Jalen Carter in that way, like the way you talked about Fletcher Cox and the way you talked about Jason Peters. Jalen Carter's talent is such that I understand there's off the field considerations that made him drop to number 9, but when you watch him play football, you're like, how isn't this guy the number 1 pick in the draft? Because and Ndamukong Suh and Warren, like there are very few interior players who are like that.
Love it. Zach Berman, thanks for stopping by, buddy.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.